My name is Helen, and I am 62 years old. I never thought that one day I would sit here confessing to strangers about the deepest wound of my life, a wound not carved by an enemy or a thief, but by the very person I once carried in my womb. For 30 years, every paycheck I earned, every coin I saved, every dream I put aside was for my daughter. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, wearing the same pair of shoes until the soles split, just so she would never feel poor the way I did when I was young. I built her world with my hands, my tears, and my love. And yet, on the very morning of her wedding, I discovered that she had stolen everything from me. Not just my savings, not just my future security. She stole the very respect between mother and daughter. I still remember the exact moment it happened. I had gone to the bank, clutching my small purse, planning to withdraw a few $1,000s to give her as a wedding gift. I wanted her to have something from me that felt symbolic, the nest egg of my lifetime. I had rehearsed in my head how I would hand her the envelope before the ceremony, how her eyes would fill with tears, how she would whisper, "Thank you, Mom. You've always been my angel." But when I handed my card to the teller, she frowned. She typed something on her computer, then excused herself and disappeared behind a door. I waited, my heart already thumping in my chest with unease. When she returned, she was accompanied by the manager, a man with a rehearsed smile. "Mrs. Harris," he said gently, "your account balance is 0. The words didn't make sense. 0? I laughed nervously, thinking it was a mistake, some clerical error. But he printed a statement and slid it across the counter. Page after page showed withdrawal after withdrawal, each larger than the last, until nothing remained. The signature beside each transaction was familiar, painfully familiar. My daughter's handwriting, elegant and precise, the one I had once praised when she won a school award for penmanship. My hands trembled as I flipped through the papers. The last transaction had been just 2 days before, draining the final $15,000. I asked the manager how it was possible, and he explained that 2 years ago I had added her as a joint account holder when she promised to help me manage finances. At the time, I thought it was a gesture of trust. I thought she wanted to protect me as I grew older. Instead, she used that trust to strip me bare. I walked out of the bank in a daze, the world around me distorted, as if I had plunged underwater. The air was heavy, sounds muffled, colors dimmed. On the bus ride home, people chatted, laughed, stared at their phones, but I was locked in a cage of disbelief. I replayed every moment of her childhood in my head, the nights I sat beside her crib, whispering lullabies, the mornings I braided her hair before school, the endless sacrifices, shoes I didn't buy, vacations I never took, meals I skipped, just so she could have ballet lessons, piano classes, private tutors. Was all of it meaningless? Did she ever love me? Or was she only biding her time until she could take what she wanted? These questions gnawed at me like rats in the dark. When I confronted her later that day, her reaction was not guilt, not shame, not even surprise. She looked me in the eyes with a smirk and said, "It's not stealing, Mom. It's just money and you weren't using it anyway. At your age, what do you need it for? I have a life to build." Her voice was icy, her words deliberate, as if she had rehearsed them. I felt as if she had slapped me across the face. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I whispered, "I was going to give you that money as a gift." She shrugged, adjusting her diamond earring. A diamond I now realized had been bought with my sweat. "Then consider it done," she said. "Problem solved." She walked out of my kitchen without another word, leaving me standing there, clutching the counter for balance, my knees threatening to give way. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the old house creak. I thought of my late husband, how he had died when our daughter was 12, how I had promised him on his deathbed that I would protect her, give her every opportunity, raise her into a woman he would be proud of. I had kept that promise for 30 years, and this was my reward. Betrayal, humiliation, abandonment. My lip trembled as I whispered into the empty room, "Where did I go wrong?" Tears streamed down my cheeks, hot and relentless, until they soaked the pillow. But what hurt more than the tears was the silence from my daughter's room, as if she slept peacefully, without a shred of remorse while I drowned in agony. The next morning, the house was buzzing with preparations for her wedding. Dresses hung from the closet, shoes scattered across the floor, makeup bags overflowing on the vanity. Relatives arrived with cheerful voices, congratulating her, telling me how lucky I was to have such a radiant daughter. Each word was a dagger twisting deeper into my chest. If they only knew that behind her radiant smile, she had gutted her own mother. At one point, she pulled me aside and hissed, "Don't you dare say anything today. Don't you dare embarrass me. You'll sit quietly, smile for the photos, and keep your mouth shut. Do you understand?" I looked at her, stunned by her audacity. She was not begging me for forgiveness. She was commanding me like a servant. My own child had become a stranger, a tyrant dressed in white lace. So I ask you, if your own blood treated you as disposable, if the person you loved most in this world spit on your sacrifices, what would you do? Would you stay silent? Would you swallow the humiliation, pretending everything was perfect just to avoid scandal? Or would you stand up even if your voice shook, even if the whole world called you mad? That question haunted me as I ironed my old dress for the wedding, as I applied cheap powder to hide the lines on my face, as I forced a smile in the mirror that felt like a mask cracking. But beneath that mask, something stirred, a fire I hadn't felt in years. Because one thing my daughter forgot is that mothers may bend, but they don't break. And so I made a decision that night, a decision that would change everything. I would not remain silent. I would not let her waltz into marriage, stealing my life savings and parading herself as a princess while I was left penniless and humiliated. No, if she thought she could bury me in shame, she was wrong. I would be the one to bury her lies. She didn't know it yet, but the wedding she dreamed of as her fairy tale would turn into her reckoning, and I would be the one holding the evidence. The morning after I discovered my savings had been drained, I walked to the bank again, determined to demand answers. The city streets were alive with ordinary people rushing to work, clutching their coffee cups. But for me, every step felt like walking toward a guillotine. The building loomed in front of me, tall and sterile, glass windows reflecting a sky I no longer trusted. Inside, the air smelled of polished marble and air conditioning. I approached the counter, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I need to understand exactly what happened to my account," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The young teller looked uncomfortable, glancing at the computer screen. She called over the manager again. This time, he invited me into his office, a small, cold room with framed certificates on the wall. He placed the printed statements in front of me, each withdrawal neatly logged, each signature replicated with chilling precision. "Mrs. Harris," he said carefully, "as your daughter is a joint account holder, she has full authority to withdraw funds at any time. Legally, nothing was done improperly." His words struck me like blows. Legally, nothing wrong. But morally, ethically, how could it be anything but theft? He tried to soften it, saying, "Perhaps it was for the wedding expenses. Maybe she intended to surprise you." I shook my head, tears burning the back of my eyes. A surprise is flowers. A surprise is breakfast in bed. This is robbery. The man avoided my gaze, sliding the papers back into the folder. "I'm sorry," he said, but his apology was empty, like the balance in my account. I walked out into the street with those documents clutched in my hands like a death sentence. I felt the city swallow me whole. The traffic lights blurred, horns blared, and yet none of it touched me. My entire world had narrowed to those lines of ink and numbers. I had wanted to believe maybe it was a mistake, maybe someone else was responsible. But now I had proof. It was her, my daughter, my own blood. The paper bore her signature again and again, each one a dagger carved straight into my heart. The betrayal wasn't abstract anymore. It was black and white, documented, undeniable. On my way home, I stopped at a small cafe, a place I used to take her when she was little. We would share a slice of chocolate cake, her face smudged with frosting, her laughter echoing like music. Now I sat alone at a corner table, staring at the ghosts of those memories, the hum of chatter around me, mocking my solitude. I opened the folder again, my eyes scanning the figures. She hadn't just taken the money for one purchase. No, it had been systematic, calculated, spread out over months. The first withdrawal had been small, just $500. Then another, then $1,000, then more. Each time she grew bolder until she had drained every last cent. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a plan. My daughter had been stealing from me long before I realized it. I thought of the past year, all the little luxuries she suddenly flaunted, the designer handbags, the expensive spa treatments, the vacations she claimed her fiancé had paid for. I had believed her, because I wanted to believe her. But now the pieces fell into place. It wasn't her fiancé's money. It wasn't generosity. It was mine. My sacrifices transformed into her vanity. My sleepless nights working double shifts had become her champagne nights in luxury hotels. The more I thought of it, the more bile rose in my throat. My stomach churned until I felt I might be sick right there in the cafe. I covered my mouth with trembling hands, whispering to myself, "How could she? How could she?" The cafe door jingled and a familiar voice called my name. It was Margaret, an old neighbor I hadn't seen in months. She was carrying shopping bags, her hair freshly styled, her perfume sharp in the air. "Helen, dear, I heard the wedding is this weekend. You must be so proud." I forced a smile, nodding, but inside my chest was a storm. She leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "I saw your daughter at the bridal boutique downtown. My goodness, the dress she picked, it must have cost a fortune. And those shoes, those diamonds. Your son-in-law is certainly generous." My throat closed up. Generous. If only she knew. I mumbled something polite, but the words barely made it past my lips. I clutched the folder tighter, praying she wouldn't notice. Margaret, like everyone else, believed the illusion. My daughter's fairy tale was built on the bones of my life, and nobody could see it but me. That night, I returned home to find her sprawled on the sofa, laughing into her phone, a glass of champagne in her hand. The living room was littered with shopping bags, tissue paper, receipts. She looked up at me, annoyed, as if my presence interrupted her fun. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked sharply. I held the folder to my chest, swallowing the words that threatened to spill out. "Nothing," I said quietly. But inside, I was screaming. I wanted to shout, "You stole from me! You drained every drop of blood I poured into this family." But I couldn't. Not yet. I was alone, and she was stronger than me in that moment, surrounded by friends, supported by her fiancé, worshipped by relatives. If I spoke too soon, no one would believe me. I would be the crazy old woman jealous of her daughter's success. So I swallowed my rage and walked to my room, closing the door gently behind me. In the darkness, I sank to my knees, clutching the folder until the edges dug into my palms. The betrayal was no longer just an open wound. It was poison spreading through my veins, slow and deadly. I pressed my forehead against the floor, whispering prayers that felt like broken glass in my throat. I asked for strength, for clarity, for some sign that I wasn't losing my mind. The silence answered me, heavy and suffocating. But beneath that silence, a spark began to flicker. Because if my daughter thought she had won, she was wrong. I might be old, I might be tired, but I was not finished. She had lit a fire in me that she could not extinguish. And one day soon, she would see the flames. The next day, I tried to carry on as if life were normal. I brewed coffee in my chipped mug, buttered a slice of bread, and sat by the window pretending to enjoy the sunrise. But every sip tasted bitter. Every bite turned to ash. The folder from the bank lay on the table staring at me like an accusation. I wanted to hide it away, to push it into the drawer and pretend none of it had happened, but reality doesn't vanish just because you refuse to look at it. Reality waits, and the longer you ignore it, the louder it knocks. That afternoon, I decided to go for a walk downtown, anything to escape the suffocating silence of my house. The streets were filled with wedding displays, floral arches, mannequins in silk gowns, shops offering once-in-a-lifetime packages. My eyes glazed over until I stopped in front of a boutique, the same one Margaret had mentioned. I peered through the glass, and there she was, my daughter, standing on a pedestal in a gown that shimmered under the spotlights like it was spun from starlight. Salesgirls hovered around her, their hands fluttering like birds, adjusting the veil, smoothing the train. She twirled, admiring herself in the mirror, her laughter ringing across the room. I froze outside, clutching the strap of my purse so hard it cut into my palm. That dress alone was worth more than my entire yearly salary, and I knew, without a shadow of doubt, that it had been paid for with my money. My stomach churned. I felt like a beggar staring at a feast, except the feast was carved from my own flesh. She didn't see me, and maybe that was a blessing. But what I did see chilled me even more. When the clerk handed her the receipt, she didn't flinch. She signed with a flourish, her handwriting bold and carefree. And then, almost casually, she said, "Put it on the Harris account." My heart dropped. Harris, that was me. That was my name. She had used my name to finalize her glory. I stumbled backward from the glass, my breath fogging against the window. For a moment, I thought I might collapse right there on the sidewalk. People brushed past me, annoyed, not knowing that I was watching my life savings draped on the shoulders of the person who had gutted me. My knees trembled as I forced myself to keep walking. I needed air. I needed answers. Later that evening, I stopped at the small grocery store around the corner, and as fate would have it, I ran into Clara, one of my oldest friends. She had known me since high school, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She looked at me with surprise. "Helen, you look pale. Are you all right?" I forced a smile, but she narrowed her gaze. "Don't lie to me, I know that look." I hesitated, then asked lightly, "Have you seen my daughter lately?" Clara snorted. "Everyone's seen her. She's been parading around town like a queen. I saw her at the jewelry store last week, dripping in diamonds. And guess what she told the clerk? That her mother was financing everything. I thought she was just bragging, but—" She stopped when she saw my face blanch. I gripped her arm. "She said what?" Clara looked confused. She said, "My mom wanted me to have the wedding of my dreams. She's paying for all of it." I assumed you were spoiling her. That's what everyone's been saying, Helen, that you've been bankrolling this spectacle. The world spun. I had been painted as the benefactor of my own destruction. To outsiders, it looked like generosity. Nobody knew it was theft. I swallowed hard, trying to keep the tears from spilling, but my voice cracked. "I didn't pay for any of it, Clara. She stole it, every penny." Clara's jaw dropped. "Are you serious?" I nodded, unable to say more. Her face hardened. "Helen, you can't stay quiet about this. She's not just stealing from you. She's rewriting the truth, making you look like you agreed to it. If you let this go, you'll be the fool in everyone's eyes." Her words sliced me open. She was right. Already the neighbors whispered about how extravagant the wedding was, how lucky my daughter was to have such a supportive mother, and all the while I was sitting in my kitchen with empty accounts, pretending everything was fine. That night, as I folded laundry in the dim light of my bedroom, memories washed over me. I remembered the day I first opened that savings account 20 years ago. I had walked into the bank with $200 in my pocket. money I had saved by skipping meals, by sewing clothes for neighbors, by cleaning houses after my regular shift. The clerk had smiled as I deposited it, telling me it was the start of something important. Every month I added a little more, $5 here, $50 there. When I got a promotion, I added more. When I received my first Christmas bonus, I put the whole thing in. That account was not just numbers. It was my life story written in dollars and cents. And now, every chapter had been erased by my daughter's hand. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding one of her old baby dresses, a tiny yellow thing I had kept all these years. I pressed it against my face, inhaling the faded scent of innocence. Back then, she had been my reason to fight, my reason to survive after her father died. I whispered to that little dress, "Where did she go? Where did my little girl disappear to?" The silence that followed was unbearable. The next morning, I overheard a conversation that added fuel to my torment. 2 relatives had come early to help with wedding preparations. I was in the kitchen, pouring coffee, when I heard them whispering in the living room. "She's so lucky," one said. "Most mothers wouldn't give away their entire savings like that." The other replied, "Yes, but it shows Helen really loves her. I wish my mother would do the same." I gripped the edge of the counter until my knuckles went white. They believed the lie completely. To them, I wasn't a victim. I was a willing donor, an old fool blinded by love. My chest heaved with suppressed rage. I wanted to storm into the room, slam the bank papers on the table, and scream, "I never gave her a dime!" But I didn't. Not yet. Because I knew that if I revealed the truth too soon, they would not believe me. They would say I was bitter, confused, maybe even senile, and my daughter would win again. But I couldn't stop the tears when I went back to my room. I cried into my hands, my shoulders shaking violently. The humiliation was suffocating. The betrayal was absolute. But even through the sobs, a thought formed, sharp and unrelenting. If she wanted to humiliate me in silence, then I would humiliate her in daylight. If she wanted to rewrite my story, then I would seize the pen back. The fire that had sparked the night before grew hotter, and deep inside, I knew one thing. I would not let her walk down that aisle without facing the truth. 2 days before the wedding, my daughter hosted what she called a pre-wedding soiree. I called it something else, a showcase of greed. The invitations had been sent to relatives, neighbors, colleagues of her fiancé. It was held in a rented banquet hall downtown, draped in satin and roses, with chandeliers glittering like crowns above the guests. When I walked in, clutching my small handbag, I felt like a shadow in a world of gold. Everyone was dressed in jewels and gowns, glasses of champagne in their hands, laughter echoing like bells. I wore my old navy dress, the only decent one I owned, ironed crisp but undeniably plain among their silks. From across the room, I saw her, my daughter. She was radiant, yes, but it was a radiance borrowed from me, stolen from the years of my labor. The gown she wore shimmered like liquid silver, the necklace on her throat catching every glint of light. People surrounded her, praising her beauty, congratulating her luck. She smiled like a queen receiving her subjects, while I, the very woman who had made that luxury possible, stood invisible at the edge of the crowd. I tried to blend into the background, but she saw me. Our eyes locked for a second. Her smile didn't falter, but her gaze sharpened, warning me, "Don't you dare ruin this." She turned back to her admirers, laughter spilling from her lips, leaving me frozen in humiliation. During dinner, I sat at a long table, squeezed between distant cousins who barely remembered my name. The plates were piled high with delicacies, lobster, steak, desserts that melted on the tongue. But my appetite was gone. I could barely swallow water. Across the hall, I watched her raise a toast, her fiancé's arm around her waist. She lifted her glass, declaring, "None of this would have been possible without my mother's sacrifice. She gave me everything so I could have my dream wedding." Applause thundered, cameras flashed, and every head turned toward me. I wanted the floor to open and swallow me whole. Their eyes were filled with admiration for her, for the story she had twisted into a noble lie. Some clapped for me, smiling warmly as if I were a saint. My chest burned with rage. I hadn't sacrificed willingly. I had been robbed. But in their eyes, I was the generous fool, the doting mother who emptied her pockets to crown her daughter. I forced a smile, though inside I was screaming. After the toast, one of my cousins leaned over and whispered, "Helen, you must be so proud. I didn't know you had that kind of money saved. You're incredible." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I wanted to say, "No, I didn't give it to her. She stole it, every last cent." But the words caught in my throat. My cousin patted my hand gently, oblivious to the storm raging behind my eyes. The humiliation only deepened when her fiancé's parents approached me later. They were dressed in tailored suits, their perfume so strong it lingered in the air after they passed. "Helen," the mother said with a saccharine smile, "you're truly remarkable. Most women your age would be clinging to their money, afraid of the future. But you, so selfless, sacrificing everything for your daughter's happiness, you're an inspiration." I nodded weakly, my stomach twisting. Inspiration. If only they knew I had been forced into this role by betrayal, not by choice. As the evening wore on, I found myself drifting away from the crowd, standing alone near the exit doors. I could hear laughter, music, glasses clinking, but it all felt distant, as though I were trapped behind glass. My eyes stung with tears I refused to let fall in public. I couldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Then came the final insult. As guests prepared to leave, my daughter pulled me aside. Her perfect smile still plastered on her face. "Mother," she whispered through clenched teeth, "you're embarrassing me. Stop sulking, just smile. People are watching." Her fingers dug into my arm, nails pressing into my skin. I winced, but she didn't loosen her grip. "Remember what I told you," she hissed. "You sit quietly, you smile, and you don't breathe a word. If you ruin this for me, I swear you'll regret it." Her words sliced through me like knives, my own child threatening me like an enemy. I stared at her, my lips trembling. "You already made me regret everything," I whispered. Her eyes narrowed. But she quickly released me when a guest approached. She slipped back into her role, laughing sweetly, leaving me standing there with a bruise on my arm and a deeper bruise on my soul. That night, back in my bedroom, I collapsed onto the bed, shaking. I pressed my sleeve up to see the red marks on my skin where her nails had dug in, physical proof of the cruelty she now wielded so easily. I buried my face in the pillow and sobbed. The sobs racked my body, tearing from me in gasps that left me breathless. I cried not just for the money, not just for the humiliation, but for the daughter I had lost. For the little girl who once kissed my cheek and called me her hero. That girl was gone, replaced by a stranger in designer shoes. The phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but the sound was relentless. When I picked it up, it was my sister. She lived 3 states away and rarely called. "Helen," she said gently, "I heard about the wedding. You must be proud." Her words reopened the wound. My voice cracked as I whispered, "Proud?" She stole everything from me, all my savings, every dollar I put aside, and now she parades it as if I gave it to her. There was silence on the other end. Then my sister sighed. "Helen, I don't know what to say. But if it's true, you can't let her walk all over you. You have to do something." I shook my head, tears rolling down my cheeks. "No one will believe me. Everyone thinks I gave it willingly. They'll say I'm jealous, bitter, losing my mind." My sister's voice firmed. "Then you need proof. You need someone to stand beside you when the time comes. Don't stay quiet. Don't let her bury you in lies." Her words lodged in my heart like seeds. Proof. Someone to stand beside me. But who would? Who would risk the wrath of a bride on her wedding day to defend the mother she had already buried under a mountain of deception? I lay awake long after midnight, staring at the ceiling, my body trembling with exhaustion and grief. The house was silent, but I felt the echo of her voice. "Don't you dare ruin this for me." It rang in my ears like a curse. I closed my eyes and remembered the nights I worked late shifts, coming home with blisters on my hands, counting every dollar before depositing it into that account. I remembered the promises I whispered to myself. This is for her future, for her happiness. I had imagined giving it to her with love, not having it ripped from me with cruelty. For the first time, doubt crept in. Maybe I should stay silent. Maybe it would be easier to swallow the humiliation than to risk destroying her wedding. Maybe people would call me a monster if I ruined her day. The thought of facing hundreds of accusing eyes made me sick. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. I pressed my palms to my face, rocking slightly, whispering to myself, I can't do this." The tears flowed until there were none left, and then, in that hollow quiet, a small ember of anger flickered again. She thought she had silenced me. She thought she had cornered me into obedience. But she didn't know that even the weakest flame, once ignited, could become a wildfire. I turned to the nightstand where the folder from the bank lay waiting. I pulled it out, spread the papers across my bed, and stared at them until dawn. The proof was there, cold and undeniable. And if I could find a way to use it, if I could gather even one ally to stand beside me, I could bring her entire illusion crashing down. The night before the wedding, the house was quiet, but it was not peace. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a storm waiting to break. I sat alone in the kitchen, the clock ticking loud on the wall, every second pressing against my skull. The dishes were washed, the counters wiped, yet I kept scrubbing the same spot over and over, my hands trembling. I didn't know if I was trying to clean the counter or scrub away the shame that clung to me like dirt I could never wash off. My daughter had gone out with her bridesmaids, celebrating, laughing, filling the night with champagne and promises of forever. I had been left behind as usual, invisible in the house I had built for her. On the table in front of me sat the folder from the bank, the papers that had become both my burden and my only weapon. I traced the ink with my finger, the signatures that matched her handwriting perfectly, the withdrawals that told the story of my slow, methodical betrayal. I thought of her words at the pre-wedding dinner. "Don't you dare embarrass me." They replayed in my head like a chant. My chest tightened until I couldn't breathe. I whispered into the empty room, maybe she's right. Maybe silence is better. But even as I said it, a voice deep inside screamed that silence was surrender. Around midnight, there was a knock at my door. I startled, my heart leaping into my throat. When I opened it, my brother stood there, his face heavy with pity. "Helen," he said, stepping inside, "I want to talk to you before tomorrow." He sat down at the kitchen table, his large hands folded, his eyes avoiding mine. "I've heard you're upset about the money. Look, maybe it's best if you let it go. She's getting married. If you make a scene, you'll ruin her life. Everyone will blame you." I stared at him, speechless. My own brother, the man who had once sworn he'd protect me, was now protecting her instead. "She stole from me," I whispered, my voice trembling. He sighed as though I were a stubborn child. "You're exaggerating. She told us you gave her the money. Everyone believes that. If you contradict her tomorrow, you'll look unstable. Do you want that?" His words cut deeper than knives. "So I'm the crazy one now?" I asked, tears stinging my eyes. He didn't answer. He simply patted my hand and muttered, "Don't make this harder than it has to be," before leaving me in the dark kitchen, more alone than ever. After he left, the silence roared louder. I pressed my palms to my ears, trying to drown out the echo of his words. Crazy, unstable, a bitter old woman. That's what they would call me. My chest convulsed as sobs tore free. I slid down to the floor, curling against the cold tiles, shaking like a child. For years I had been strong, enduring every hardship without complaint. But in that moment I felt broken, shattered into pieces too small to put back together. At some point I must have dozed off, because I woke to the gray light of dawn filtering through the window. My body ached from the hard floor, my cheeks stiff with dried tears. I dragged myself to the bathroom and stared into the mirror. The woman looking back at me was not the Helen I remembered. Her eyes were swollen, her face hollow, her shoulders slumped with defeat. I hardly recognized her. I whispered, "Is this who you've become? A ghost in your own story?" The days stretched on like a nightmare. Relatives came and went, buzzing with excitement, carrying dresses and flowers. Nobody noticed me. Nobody asked how I was. I was just the old mother, tucked into the corner, expected to smile quietly while others celebrated. When I tried to help set the tables, my daughter snapped at me. "Don't touch that, you'll ruin it. Just sit down, Mom. We don't need your help." Her friends laughed softly behind her, covering their mouths, as if I were a clumsy maid. The humiliation burned, but what cut deeper was the look in her eyes, cold, dismissive, as though I were an obstacle, not a mother. I turned away quickly, hiding the tears that threatened to fall. My hands shook so badly I had to grip the edge of a chair to steady myself. That afternoon, as I sat outside on the porch, one of my neighbors, an elderly woman named Doris, stopped by. She brought a small basket of flowers and wished my daughter well. As she chatted, her gaze lingered on me. "Helen, dear, you look exhausted. Is everything all right?" My throat closed, and for a moment I wanted to spill everything. But then I remembered my daughter's threat, my brother's warning, and I forced a smile. "I'm fine, just tired." Doris patted my shoulder, giving me a look that said she didn't believe me. "If you ever need someone to talk to, you know where I am." She left, and I sat staring at the flowers she had left behind, wondering if they would be the only kindness I received that day. As the sun set, preparations reached a frenzy. The house buzzed with laughter, music, footsteps running up and down the stairs. I retreated to my room, shutting the door against the noise. I sat on the bed, clutching the bank papers to my chest, rocking back and forth. My daughter's words rang in my ears. "If you ruin this for me, you'll regret it." My brother's voice layered on top. "Everyone will think you're crazy." The chorus of their voices suffocated me until I could barely breathe. I pressed my forehead against the folder, whispering, "Maybe I should give up. Maybe it's easier to let her win." The thought was poison, but it slithered through me, tempting me with the false promise of peace. If I stayed silent, the wedding would go on, the family would stay intact, and I would not be branded as the villain. But silence came at a cost: my dignity, my future, my very sense of self. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath me. One step forward, and I would fall into silence forever. One step back, and I would face a war I wasn't sure I could win. And then, in the stillness, a memory came to me. It was of my husband lying in the hospital bed years ago, his hand weak, but his eyes fierce. He had whispered, "Take care of her, Helen. No matter what, protect her." I had nodded through my tears, promising him I would. I had kept that promise for decades, but now, I realized, protecting her no longer meant giving her everything. It meant protecting her from herself, from the monster she had become. And maybe, just maybe, protecting myself too. The tears slowed, my breathing steadied. I sat up, clutching the folder tighter. For the first time in days, my heart felt firm instead of fractured. I whispered into the empty room, "You think I'm weak. You think I'll stay silent. But tomorrow you'll see. Tomorrow the truth will rise, and you won't be able to hide from it." As the house grew quiet and the last guests left, I prepared myself for the coming storm. I ironed my simple dress, smoothing every wrinkle, as though preparing armor for battle. I polished my shoes, even though the leather was cracked. I packed the bank papers carefully into my purse, along with the small cross my husband had given me on our wedding day. I looked at myself in the mirror one last time. My face was lined, my body tired, but my eyes, they burned with something fierce, something unbreakable. When I lay down that night, I knew sleep would not come. But I also knew something else. I was done being a victim. Tomorrow, when the music played and the guests applauded, I would rise. And when I rose, the world would finally see her for who she truly was. The morning of the wedding dawned bright, almost cruelly so. The sun spilled across the floorboards like liquid gold, but in my chest there was only steel. I had not slept. My body ached from the long night, but my mind was sharpened, every thought honed to a blade's edge. Today would not be just a wedding. Today would be a trial. I rose before anyone else and slipped quietly into the kitchen. The smell of fresh flowers from the bouquets filled the air, but to me it was the scent of battlefields, disguising the blood that had yet to be spilled. I laid the folder of bank statements on the table, flipping once more through the pages, memorizing every number, every signature. Each line was a wound, but also a weapon. For days, those papers had been my torment. Now they were my shield. As I sat there, the phone rang. The sound pierced the silence, startling me so much I nearly dropped the folder. I picked up the receiver, my hand trembling. On the other end was a calm, male voice. "Mrs. Harris, this is Adrian from the bank. I just wanted to confirm we'll have the certified copies of the withdrawal records ready by noon, should you need them." My breath caught. He had remembered my desperate call the night before. "Thank you," I whispered. My throat ached with the weight of those words. He replied, "And Mrs. Harris, if anyone doubts you, these documents leave no room for questions. You're not alone in this." Not alone? 2 words that struck me like lightning. For the first time in weeks, I felt a hand reach through the darkness and steady me. I hung up the phone, pressing it to my chest. The bank would stand behind me. I wasn't just a hysterical old woman. I was a woman armed with truth. As the household stirred awake, footsteps echoing upstairs, voices calling for coffee and dresses, I slipped out the back door. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew and promise. I walked quickly, clutching the folder, until I reached the corner cafe where I had arranged to meet Clara, my oldest friend. She was waiting, her sharp eyes scanning the street until they landed on me. She stood, wrapping me in a hug that was more armor than affection. "Show me," she said simply. I spread the papers across the small table, my hands shaking. She scanned them, her mouth tightening with every page. When she finished, she looked up, her eyes burning. "Helen, this is undeniable. She can't talk her way out of this." My voice broke as I whispered, "But will they believe me? Will anyone care about an old woman's truth when they're blinded by a white dress and champagne?" Clara reached across the table, gripping my hands with surprising strength. "They'll believe you because I'll be standing right there beside you. And when people see 2 women speaking the same truth, when they see these documents, when they see her lies unravel, the facade will collapse. You have more power than you think, Helen. She underestimated you." Her words seeped into my bones, rebuilding the cracks. For the first time, I wasn't just a mother mourning betrayal. I was a woman preparing a counterattack. I tucked the papers back into the folder, sliding it into my purse with deliberate care. The purse felt heavier now, but not with burden, with purpose. We walked together toward the church, my steps growing steadier with each block. The bells in the distance tolled noon, each chime sounding like a drumbeat of war. The closer we came, the more I felt the shift inside me. I was no longer moving like prey. I was moving like a hunter. At the church entrance, Clara squeezed my hand once more. "Remember," she said, "you're not the one who should be ashamed. Let her carry the shame she earned." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. As the guests began to gather, laughter filling the air, I took my seat near the front, my purse on my lap, my hands folded calmly. To anyone watching, I looked like a quiet, dutiful mother waiting for her daughter's big moment. But inside, my heart was steady, my mind focused. I was no longer a woman drowning in sorrow. I was a woman who had chosen to fight. And as the organ music swelled and the bride appeared at the end of the aisle, radiant in her stolen glory, I knew one thing with certainty. The storm had finally turned. She thought I would sit in silence, but I had already found my voice, and when the time came, the truth would roar louder than any vow she spoke. The church hummed with anticipation. Guests filled every pew, their whispers blending into a low buzz of admiration. The scent of roses and perfume clung thick in the air. I sat quietly near the front, my purse heavy on my lap, the folder inside pressing against my thigh like a pulse. My heart beat in rhythm with it, steady but fierce. I had been silent too long. Today, silence would die. Before the ceremony began, I slipped away from the pews and found my way to the bridal room. The hallway was hushed, the walls lined with photographs of saints staring down like witnesses. My steps echoed on the polished floor as if announcing the moment to come. When I reached the door, I paused, my hand trembling on the knob. I whispered a prayer, not for strength, but for clarity. Then I pushed it open. Inside, my daughter stood before a gilded mirror, her gown spread around her like a pond of silk. Bridesmaids flitted around, adjusting her veil, retouching her lipstick. The room smelled of hairspray and champagne. She saw me in the mirror, and for a split second her smile faltered. Then she waved her friends away. "Give us a moment," she said, her tone light but edged with steel. The girls glanced at each other but obeyed, leaving the room until it was just the two of us. She turned slowly, her eyes sharp beneath the delicate veil. "What are you doing here, Mom?" Her voice was flat, almost bored, as though I were an interruption to her performance. I stepped closer, clutching the purse to my chest. "We need to talk." Her laugh was soft, mocking. "Now? You choose now to talk? You're unbelievable." She adjusted her necklace, her movements precise, calm, as if I didn't matter. I pulled the folder out and laid it on the vanity. The reflection of the papers glared back at us in the mirror. "These," I said quietly, "are the bank records. Every withdrawal you made, every dollar you stole. Don't deny it." Her eyes flicked to the folder, then back to me. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Instead, she smirked. "So? You brought paperwork to my wedding? That's pathetic." My throat tightened. "Pathetic? You emptied my life savings. 30 years of sacrifice. Gone. And now you stand here dressing yourself in silk paid for with my blood, my sweat, my years. Do you feel no shame?" She stepped closer, towering in her heels, her perfume sharp and suffocating. "Listen carefully, Mother," she whispered, her voice venom wrapped in silk. "No one cares about your sacrifices. No one is going to believe your little sob story. Out there, I'm the bride, I'm the star. You're just an old woman desperate for attention. If you try to speak, they'll laugh at you. They'll call you bitter, crazy. And when the dust settles, I'll still be married, and you'll still be nothing." Her words slammed into me, but I held my ground. I forced my voice to steady. "You think this is about envy? About me wanting attention? No, this is about truth, and the truth always finds its way out." Her smile curved cruelly. "Truth is whatever people choose to believe, and no one will believe you over me. Look at you, wrinkled dress, tired eyes. Look at me, glowing, adored, untouchable. I win, Mother, I've already won." For a moment silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. My hands trembled at my sides, but then I felt the weight of the papers in my purse, the echo of Clara's words, the certainty of the bank's support. Something shifted inside me. My fear hardened into resolve. I stepped even closer, my eyes locked on hers. "No," I whispered. "You haven't won yet, because the game isn't over." Her eyes narrowed, the smirk faltering. "What are you planning?" she asked, her voice sharp now, stripped of mockery. I leaned in, my voice low and steady. "I'm planning to tell the truth, out there before God, before your fiancé, before every guest who came to worship at your altar of lies. I will speak, and when I do, your silk and your diamonds won't save you." For the first time, she looked rattled. Her hands tightened around her bouquet until the petals bent. "If you do this," she hissed, "I'll make sure you regret it. I'll tell them you're delusional, that you've lost your mind. You'll be the one humiliated." I straightened my shoulders, lifting my chin. "I've lived in humiliation long enough. Tonight, that ends." We stared at each other, a mother and daughter locked in silent war, one clad in silk, the other in scars. In her eyes, I saw fury. In mine, she must have seen something new, an unshakable fire she hadn't expected. Finally, she turned back to the mirror, adjusting her veil with trembling fingers. "Fine," she muttered. "Do what you want. But when it's over, don't come crying to me." I gathered the folder, tucking it back into my purse, and walked toward the door. Before leaving, I looked back one last time. "I'm not the one who will be crying," I said softly. Then I closed the door behind me, my footsteps echoing like thunder down the hall. The organ swelled, its deep notes shaking the air like a heartbeat. Guests rose to their feet, their faces glowing with admiration as my daughter appeared at the end of the aisle, shimmering in stolen silk. She glided forward, her arm linked with her fiancé's, her smile a mask of perfection. Phones lifted, cameras flashed, the room holding its breath as if witnessing a fairy tale. I sat in the front pew, my purse heavy on my lap, my hands clasped so tightly they ached. My throat burned with the words I had swallowed for weeks, words that demanded to be released. The priest's voice rang out, solemn and steady. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." His words floated like smoke, but my heart pounded louder, drowning him out. I could hear only the echo of her voice in the bridal room. "You'll be the one humiliated." I pressed my hand against my chest, steadying my breath. Not today. As the vows began, her fiancé looked into her eyes, his voice trembling with sincerity. "I promise to love you, to honor you, to cherish you, in sickness and in health, for as long as we both shall live." She smiled, her lashes lowering in feigned modesty. When it was her turn, her voice rang clear and sweet. "I promise to be faithful, to be loving, to be true." Each word was a lie coated in sugar. I felt bile rise in my throat. Then came the moment. The priest raised his hands. "If anyone here has reason why these two should not be joined, speak now or forever. Hold your peace." The room hushed, a silence so deep it seemed to press against my eardrums. My daughter's eyes flicked toward me, a flash of warning in their depths. She was daring me to stay silent. But the fire inside me roared louder than her threat. I rose. My knees shook, but my voice was steady. "I have reason." Gasps rippled through the church. Heads turned. Cameras swiveled. My daughter's face froze, her smile cracking. "Mother, sit down," she hissed through clenched teeth, but I did not move. I stepped into the aisle, the sound of my heels echoing like gunshots. I opened my purse and pulled out the folder, holding it aloft like a torch. "This wedding is built on lies," I said, my voice rising. "My daughter has stolen from me. She drained my savings, every cent I worked 30 years to earn, and used it to pay for this spectacle." A murmur swept the crowd, disbelief mixing with shock. Her fiancé blinked, confusion clouding his face. "What is she talking about?" he asked, turning to my daughter. She forced a laugh, though her voice trembled. "She's confused. She's old. She doesn't understand." I slammed the folder onto the altar rail, the papers spilling across the white cloth. "Confused? These are certified bank records. Every withdrawal, every signature. Look at them. Look at the truth." The priest stepped back, startled. Guests leaned forward, craning to see. My daughter's fiancé snatched a page, his eyes scanning rapidly, his face drained of color. "These signatures, these are yours," he whispered to her. She reached for the paper, stammering, "No, it's not what it looks like." But I cut her off. "It's exactly what it looks like. She stole from her own mother to build her fantasy, and then she stood here, before God, vowing to be true. How can a woman who betrays her own blood speak of truth?" The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the rustle of papers in the groom's shaking hands. Then, slowly, he lowered the document, his jaw tightening. "You told me your mother was giving you her savings as a gift," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "You said she wanted this for you." She clutched his arm desperately. I didn't mean it was just a loan. I was going to—" He pulled his arm away, stepping back as though her touch burned. "You lied to me. You lied to everyone." His voice rang through the church, echoing against the stone walls. Gasps turned into murmurs, then into pointed stares. Guests whispered, eyes darting between the papers and the bride. Her friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Her smile crumbled, her mask collapsing under the weight of the truth. I stood tall, my voice steady though my hands trembled. I raised her alone after her father died. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to put food on the table. I saved every dollar I could, dreaming of a secure future. That money was not hers to take. Yet she took it anyway, and now she wears it, parades it, and calls it love. Tears stung my eyes, but I held them back. I will not be silent any longer. If she is willing to betray her own mother, what will she do to a husband, to a family, to anyone who dares trust her? The church erupted. Some gasped in sympathy, others in outrage. My daughter's fiancé's parents exchanged horrified looks. Guests rose to their feet, whispering, pointing. The truth spread through the crowd like wildfire. My daughter collapsed into a chair at the altar, her hands covering her face. "Stop, please," she sobbed. But the sobs were not of remorse. They were the sobs of a woman caught, cornered, stripped of her illusions. Her fiancé turned to the priest. "This ceremony is over," he said firmly. His voice shook, but his eyes were resolute. He faced her, his tone colder than I had ever heard. "I cannot marry a liar. I cannot build a future with someone who destroys the very person who gave her life." He tore the ring from his pocket and dropped it onto the altar. The metallic clang echoed like a gavel striking judgment. The guests erupted into chaos. Some comforted me, others confronted her, demanding answers. Phones captured every moment, recording the downfall of the bride who had built her empire on theft. I stood still in the center of the storm, my chest heaving. For the first time in years, I felt tall. I was no longer the invisible mother in the corner. I was the woman who had spoken, who had dared to strip away the mask. And though my heart ached for the child I once knew, I felt the fire of justice burning in my veins. As security moved forward to escort her out, my daughter looked at me, her eyes blazing with hatred. "You ruined me," she spat. I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "No," I said softly, "you ruined yourself." The church doors swung open, the cold air rushing in, carrying her sobs into the daylight. The ceremony was in ruins, the fairy tale turned to ash. And as the guests filed out, whispers clinging to the walls, I remained standing, clutching the folder that had become my weapon, my voice, my salvation. For 30 years, I had been silent. But today, the silence had ended, and the truth, once spoken, could never be buried again. The church emptied into chaos, but the chaos did not stay confined to those four walls. It spilled into the streets, into the voices of every guest, into the endless hum of phones recording, snapping, posting. By the time I stepped out into the afternoon light, I could already feel the weight of eyes upon me. Not just the guests, but strangers, pedestrians pausing as if they'd stumbled onto a spectacle they couldn't look away from. Clara was waiting at the church doors, her eyes blazing with pride. She wrapped her arm around me and whispered, "You did it. They heard you." I trembled against her shoulder. The adrenaline still coursing through me, my knees weak, but her words steadied me. For the first time in years, someone wasn't telling me to be quiet. She was telling me to stand taller. As we walked down the church steps, a voice called out, "Helen, is it true?" It was Margaret, my neighbor, clutching her pearls, her eyes wide. Behind her, others gathered, their faces a mixture of shock and curiosity. I could see phones lifted, red recording dots blinking. I could have hidden. I could have kept silent again. But I had already crossed that line. There was no going back. "Yes," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "It's true. My daughter stole my life savings, and today the world saw it." Gasps, whispers. Someone muttered, "Unbelievable." Another said, "She was always spoiled, wasn't she?" The tide was turning, slowly, inevitably. Then came the groom's parents, their faces pale with shame. His mother approached me, her lips trembling. I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry." Her words were heavy, genuine, a rare kindness amid the storm. "You saved our son from a terrible mistake." She reached for my hand and squeezed it, her grip warm and firm. "You exposed the truth, and that makes you braver than anyone here." Her husband added, his jaw set like stone, "She'll answer for what she's done, not just to you, but to everyone she deceived." His words were not comfort, but a promise. Around us, guests began to murmur louder, their whispers sharpening into judgments. How could she do that to her own mother? Imagine stealing from the very person who raised you. She deserves everything coming to her. The gossip spread like wildfire, each sentence a spark igniting the next. I glanced back at the church doors just in time to see her being led out, her gown crumpled, her makeup streaked with tears. Some guests tried to console her, but most stepped aside, their faces turned cold. The admiration she had bathed in for months evaporated in a single afternoon. The same mouths that once praised her now spat her name like poison. And then something I never expected happened. A young woman stepped forward holding up her phone. "I recorded the whole thing," she said. "The moment you spoke, the documents you showed, his reaction, everything. People need to see this. People need to know the truth." She didn't wait for my answer. She had already posted it. Within minutes, others followed, uploading, sharing, commenting. My private humiliation had become a public trial. But for once, I wasn't afraid of exposure. For once, the eyes of the world were not weapons aimed at me. They were witnesses. My shame was no longer hidden in shadows. It had been dragged into daylight, where it could no longer be denied. By the time Clara and I reached her car, my phone buzzed with messages from relatives, from distant friends, even from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some offered sympathy, some apologized for ever doubting me, and some simply said, "We saw. We believe you." That night, the video spread like fire through dry grass. Headlines popped up online. Bride exposed at the altar for stealing mother's savings. Comment sections filled with outrage, with condemnation, with praise for the mother who dared to speak. Strangers wrote things like, "She's a hero. That daughter is a disgrace. Justice served on the wedding day." For years, I had been invisible, my suffering hidden behind closed doors. Now my story had become a spectacle for the world, and though part of me recoiled at the attention, another part, the part that had been silenced too long, breathed easier, because at last I wasn't alone. The truth had spread beyond my lips. It had become undeniable, unstoppable, a fire no one could smother. And as I lay in Clara's guest room that night, the glow of her bedside lamp casting a soft light, I whispered into the stillness, "They believe me. Finally, they believe me." The morning after the wedding, I woke to silence. Not the heavy silence of fear that had haunted me for years, but a quieter one, fragile and new, like the pause after a storm. I sat up in Clara's guest room, the pale light of dawn spilling across the floor, and for the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel like it was caving in, but the world outside was far from quiet. My phone buzzed endlessly on the nightstand. News outlets had picked up the story. The video of me standing in the church aisle holding the folder aloft had spread across the internet. Millions had seen it. Millions had watched a mother confront her daughter in the middle of a wedding and strip away her fairy tale. Some called me brave, others called me cruel. But almost no one doubted me. The evidence was too clear. The groom's shattered expression, the documents in his hands, the truth in my voice. It was all there, undeniable. For the first time, the weight of disbelief was not crushing me. The world had seen, and the world believed. By noon, I received a call from the groom's parents. His mother's voice was warm, though weary. "Helen, I know yesterday was chaos, but I want to thank you. You saved our son from a lifetime of misery. If there's anything you need, anything at all, please don't hesitate to call." Gratitude poured from her words, and I realized then that my actions hadn't just saved myself. They had spared another family from being devoured by lies, but the consequences for my daughter were swift and merciless. Her fiancé cut off all contact. The wedding contracts she had signed with florists, caterers, photographers, all collapsed in a storm of unpaid bills. The deposits, the gowns, the jewelry, all traced back to stolen funds. The same relatives who had once praised her avoided her now, muttering words like selfish and ungrateful whenever her name came up. She had built her kingdom on stolen ground, and now the earth had swallowed it whole. I heard whispers that creditors were after her, that the bank was investigating, that her reputation was scorched beyond repair. In every corner of the neighborhood, people shook their heads and said, "What a shame. How could she do that to her own mother?" Part of me mourned. As a mother, how could I not? No matter how bitter the betrayal, she was still my child, my blood. There were nights I lay awake, wondering if I had destroyed her life completely. If perhaps I should have stayed silent one more day, let her marry, let her have her dream. But then I would remember the bruise on my arm, the empty bank account, the countless humiliations I had swallowed, and the doubt would fade. This was not my doing, this was hers. She had written her own downfall with every stolen dollar, every lie she told. I had simply pulled back the curtain. As for me, the aftermath was both strange and liberating. For years I had been invisible, erased even within my own home. But now, strangers recognized me on the street. Some approached to squeeze my hand and whisper, "You were right to do what you did." Others sent letters, emails, even small gifts, thanking me for my courage, telling me their own stories of betrayal. It was as if by exposing my wound, I had given others permission to expose theirs. Financially, the bank restored part of my savings, citing fraud in how she had accessed the account. It wasn't everything I had lost, but it was enough to breathe again, enough to know that my years of labor hadn't vanished completely into smoke. And more importantly, I had reclaimed something greater than money. I had reclaimed my voice, my dignity, my right to stand tall, even in the face of betrayal. I returned to my quiet house one evening, the air still carrying the faint scent of roses from the ruined wedding. The walls felt different now. They no longer echoed with my daughter's commands, her threats, her laughter bought with my money. They echoed only with my footsteps, steady and free. I lit a candle by my husband's photograph and whispered, I kept my promise. I took care of her as long as I could, but in the end I had to take care of myself too. The flame flickered gently, as if in agreement. The aftermath was messy, yes. My daughter's life lay in ruins, the community buzzed with scandal, and my own name was etched into headlines I never asked for. But as I stood in the quiet of my home, the papers safe in their folder, I knew this. For the first time in years, I wasn't living in fear. For the first time, the truth was louder than the lies. And that, I realized, was a kind of peace worth every battle. Weeks passed, but the echo of that day never faded. Wherever I went, people still whispered about the wedding that had collapsed under the weight of truth. Sometimes I felt exposed, as if my private agony had become entertainment for strangers. But more often, I felt something else, something I hadn't known in years. I felt seen. I no longer walked through the grocery store with my head bowed. I no longer whispered apologies when someone brushed past me. I stood taller, even in my old shoes, even with the lines etched deep into my face, because now I knew that my silence had never been strength. It had been chains. And chains are meant to be broken. The money I recovered from the bank was not enough to erase 30 years of sacrifice, but it was enough to live with dignity. I reopened the small garden behind my house, a space I had abandoned when the weight of betrayal had crushed my joy. I planted tomatoes, herbs, roses. As I pressed my hands into the soil, I felt something return to me, the certainty that I was still capable of creating life, of nurturing something that could bloom without stealing from me. Neighbors began to stop by, some offering seedlings, others simply offering company. "Helen, you inspire us," one woman said softly, watching me water the roses. "You prove that no matter how old, no matter how small, a voice can still change everything." Her words sank deep, and I realized she was right. My age was not a cage. My age was armor. At night, I often sat by the window, watching the world outside my quiet street. Sometimes I thought of my daughter, wherever she was. Rumors reached me that she had moved away, that creditors chased her, that she lived in a small apartment far from the eyes that once adored her. I imagined her sitting alone, staring at her reflection without the silk, without the diamonds, stripped of the lies she once wore like gowns. My heart ached because no matter what, she was still my child. But then I remembered the sting of her nails on my arm, the sound of her mocking laugh, the hollow in my account. And I whispered to myself, love doesn't mean blindness. Forgiveness doesn't mean silence. One evening, Clara sat with me at the kitchen table, sipping tea. She looked at me over the rim of her cup. "Do you regret it?" she asked. I thought for a long moment before answering. I regret that it came to this. I regret that the little girl I once held became the woman who betrayed me. But do I regret speaking? Do I regret standing? No, because if I had stayed silent, I would have lost not just my savings, but myself. She nodded, her eyes soft. "Then you did the right thing." And deep down, I knew she was right. I began receiving letters, messages, even calls from women across the city. Some were mothers like me, betrayed by children they had sacrificed everything for. Some were wives, trapped in silence under their husbands' fists or their family's cruelty. They said, "Your story gave me courage." They said, "Because of you, I spoke." They said, "You reminded me that I matter." I never asked to be a symbol. I never wanted to be a story that traveled beyond my street. But life doesn't always ask. Sometimes the pain you endure becomes the torch others use to find their way out of darkness. And if my suffering could light even one path, then perhaps it wasn't in vain. On the anniversary of my husband's death, I lit a candle by his photograph. The flame flickered, steady and calm. I whispered, "I protected her as long as I could, love. But in the end, I had to protect myself too. And maybe that was what she needed most, to see that even a mother's love has boundaries." For a moment, I thought I saw his smile reflected in the glass, a reminder that even promises made in grief must bend when survival is at stake. Now, as I sit here confessing to you, to strangers who may never know my face but who know my voice, I want to leave you with this. Betrayal does not always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes from the ones you nurtured, the ones you trusted most. And when it does, the pain can hollow you out until you no longer recognize yourself. But silence is not salvation. Silence is surrender. I chose to speak. I chose to rise. Even when my legs shook, even when my voice trembled, even when the world threatened to brand me as bitter or insane. And by speaking, I reclaim not just my money, not just my reputation, but my dignity. So I ask you, if it were you in my place, would you stay silent for the sake of peace, or would you speak for the sake of truth? And if my story reaches even one person trapped in chains of betrayal, let my words remind you, you are not powerless, you are not voiceless. It is never too late to break your silence. This is my story of loss, of humiliation, but also of rebirth. I was betrayed by blood, but I was reborn in truth. And though my scars will remain, they no longer chain me. They remind me that I survived. If you believe in voices like mine, in stories that claw their way out of silence to demand justice, then don't let this end here. Share this story. Comment your thoughts. Stand with those who are still too afraid to rise. Because every voice matters, even the ones that have been ignored the longest. My name is Helen. I am 62 years old. And after years of silence, I have finally learned. The truth may break a family, but it also sets a soul free.